again, Mark chapter 8. Excuse me. I can't see that far. Blindness. Blindness. We'll be reading verses 22 to 26. So we had first 21 verses. Now we have, I think, 6 verses. The verses keep going down. Tomorrow is 1 verse. So we'll read from verse 22. And they came to Bethesda, and some people brought to him a blind man and begged him to touch him. And he took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the village. And when he had spit on his eyes and laid his hands on him, he asked him, "Do you see anything?" And he looked up and said, "I see people, but they look like trees walking." Then Jesus laid his hands on his eyes again, and he opened his eyes. His sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. And he sent him to his home, saying, "Do not enter the village." This is God's infallible, inerrant, authoritative word. May he bless the reading and the listening. Amen. Just over 20 years ago, I went to the road traffic for my driver's license. I don't know where you go here if you want to start driving, legally driving. About 20 years ago, I went to the road traffic for my driver's license, and this was in South Africa because I was born in Malawi, but I actually grew up in South Africa, but I've moved back to Malawi to go and do church planting. So in South Africa, many people failed their driver's license because of what is called the reverse parking. So they ask you to reverse the car. But interesting, for me, that's not what I failed. I failed something that I never knew people fail. Can you guess what I failed? Before even I could go into the car, I failed. I failed the eye test. And I can still remember trying to argue with the examiner that my eyes are not that bad. And I was very disappointed that I failed the eye test. But it was something that I didn't easily accept. I still remember when I was told that, "Newton, your eyes are bad, you need to start wearing glasses." And when I got glasses, and again, I say this to my shame, I remember I was still keeping my glasses in the pocket because I thought they would make me look odd. I just did not like the glasses. But I failed to face reality. But the truth of the matter is, I have a struggle with my eyes. I don't see that well. It's a problem. But there's a more dangerous blindness than physical blindness, and that is spiritual blindness. And it is so dangerous that I could take a guess that none of you in this room this week, you lost your sleep because you're struggling with spiritual blindness. Because many times we do think we see. Most of us think we see. And we have an interesting story here. And sometimes you read some passages, you're like, "Okay, Lord, how do you expect me to preach this passage?" So, after studying this passage, praying, I realized the most helpful way to address this passage is to look at its context. In other words, its setting, to look at what comes after it, to look at what comes before it, and that will help us understand this passage. So we'll look at the setting or the context, then next we'll look at the story itself, then last we'll look at the significance. So that's my outline. The setting, the story itself, then the significance. In other words, so why is this story here? Why is it important? So when we look at the setting or the context, we are again looking at location, location, location. As they tell us in the real estate, right? My friend Rusty and his wife, Nancy, they just have new house. And I could tell, I think they were very clear what we were looking for. Location, location, location. They have a nice yard. They didn't just mini, money more, this house. No. Location, location, location. So it's no coincidence that this passage, it is where it is. This is a passage on what? This is a passage on spiritual blindness. Like earlier on, we saw some blindness. We saw some permanent blindness. If you are to remember what we looked at in the Pharisees who came to Jesus Christ and were demanding a sign. We saw spiritual blindness that is permanent because we are told that Jesus Christ left them. That's permanent blindness. But we did also see temporary blindness, did we not? Yes, permanent blindness is tragic. Because if you're exposed to the light, the more you're exposed to God's truth, but your heart is hardened, you may be in danger of what Jesus Christ did with these Pharisees. We're told he left them. That's permanent blindness. But there's also temporary blindness. And with temporary blindness is what we saw with his disciples. Jesus' approach with the disciples was different than with his approach with the Pharisees. You see, the disciples, these people were following Jesus Christ. Some of them left their businesses. Did they not? They left their homes. Yet, they are getting it. Their understanding who Jesus was and is was still gradual. Now, I do understand you guys have to do a double work of understanding my accent. I'm sure that's all I have. It reminds me of my pastor in South Africa. He was American, so he brought me on board to come and work as his associate. So my first sermon I preached in South Africa, he was so much concerned if the people are hearing me. Because I'm African, he's American, but he loves the people. So he asked the people, are you guys able to hear Newton? They say, yes, it's you, we're not hearing. So I do understand it is not always easy. But we see the disciples here had what we may call temporary blindness. Why would we call that temporary blindness? Well, Jesus just fed 4,000 people. And after feeding the 4,000 people, Jesus is engaged, as we saw earlier, he's engaging with the Pharisees. And he's warning his disciples about the influence or the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees and of Herod. And as he's warning them, all they can do is think about physical bread. In many senses, we have a passage of, the passage we just read is a passage of such deep spiritual mysteries at play. And the mysteries are so great, it requires spiritual eyes to see them. You know, many things you can say about miracles, but one thing you need to be certain, miracles are like signposts. They're pointing us to something. The purpose of the miracles is show us something. But what are the disciples seeing really? What is it they were supposed to be seeing but they didn't see? They should have seen more than anything else that with the presence of Jesus, this was somebody who was just different than anything else they've experienced. Here's a man that was performing miracles in the power of the Holy Spirit. And if anything else, they should have seen that this is none other than the Messiah that I've been waiting for. But yet, what we are seeing again and again, that we are still seeing spiritual blindness. This is our setting. Maybe you're not yet convinced, but you just cannot miss it. Because Mark 8, as I said earlier, this is interesting because as we're looking at Mark 8, we're looking at the subject of spiritual blindness. And I think this is what the book has been begging for us to ask. From the beginning, we are told that Jesus Christ came for a specific purpose, to show us the kingdom of God. And as he's performing miracles, that is supposed to beg a question, who then is this? And the pinnacle of that question is answered by Peter in what is called the greatest confession. When Peter now confesses that Jesus is the Christ. It's a time and place in which Peter actually identifies clearly who Jesus is. I believe that's a driving question in the entire book of Mark. Who then is this? That he can just produce food like that. He comes on the scene in the most strange and bizarre way. He displays all his power in miracles and signs and wonders. His teaching is like no other. He teaches with authority. And this was an authority that was unlike the scribes and the Pharisees. And again, this begs the question, who then is this? And Peter accurately says, he is the Christ. You are the Christ. And then notice what Jesus begins to do in verse 31. Mark 8, verse 31. All this is just a setting of this passage. And he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes and be killed and after 3 days rise again. Now, if we're going to identify one verse in the entirety of the book of Mark that summarizes the book of Mark, it will be this one. You have just learned from Jesus the rest of the story. And the next 8 chapters, from chapter 8 to 16, we're going to see Jesus' rejection by the chief priests, by the Pharisees, by the scribes, his crucifixion, his suffering, his death, and ultimate resurrection. That's what we're going to see, the chapters that follow. So Jesus immediately, he gets this information that now the disciples know who he is, that he is the anointed one. He sees this as an opportunity to explain what it means now for him as the Messiah. But as he explains this, Peter is reminding Jesus that Jesus, on this particular incident, I think you're not actually very clear. But again, before we throw stones at Peter, Peter was just like people in his day. Remember, these people were being oppressed. They were looking for someone to come and deliver them as we're facing oppression from the Romans. Now, the men that have come to know as the Messiah, he's telling them his game plan. His game plan is to come, suffer, be rejected, and die. A dying Messiah, are you kidding me? That's what Peter is saying here. Peter is telling Jesus, I don't think this is how it's going to be. And now, the fascinating thing is, this is Peter's brightest moment. Yet, it is also Peter's stupidest. I don't know if that's the word. Sorry, English is not my first language. But if anything, trying to show you, even at Peter's or the disciples' brightest moment, because Peter was speaking as a spokesperson, we still see spiritual blindness, don't we? Spiritual blindness all around. And Jesus Christ tells Peter why that is the case. Look at chapter 8, verse 33. But turning and seeing his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan." Why is Peter focused on what he's focusing on? For you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man. By the way, this is an eyewitness account. Peter was narrating this to John Mark. And then you see, he's not trying to present himself in the most clever. He's just being real as real can be. Now you see, Peter gets it, but he gets it not. Peter confessed Jesus is the Christ. In other words, Peter confessed Jesus is his Lord, is his master. The next moment, he rebukes him. One moment, Peter is God's spokesperson. The next moment, Peter is the devil's spokesperson. And Jesus Christ, what did he say to the disciples? You are all going to desert me. In my most time of need, you will desert me. What did Peter say? Lord, maybe these ones, the weak ones. Not me. But what happened? Look back to chapter 7, verse 17. Jesus had a long discussion with the Pharisees about what defiles a person, and understand that's what is actually inside. The heart is what's inside the heart defiles a man, not something that comes from outside. And verse 17. And when he had entered the house and left the people, his disciples asked him about the parable. Verse 18, and he said to them, "Then are you also without understanding? Do you not see that whatever goes into a person from outside cannot defile him?" You see, even the disciples did not get that. They are also, Jesus said, you are also without understanding. I don't know if this could also be true of us who call ourselves Reformed and Baptist, people who are faithful to the Scriptures. Can we also be a people that maybe we need understanding in some areas? We hear Jesus teaching, but we don't get it. Now turn forward to the passage we looked at again earlier, Mark chapter 8, verse 14 to 21. This is the section we looked at this morning. Jesus had just talked about the leaven of the Pharisees and of Herod, speaking about their influence. So beware of the influence of the Pharisees and Herod. Trying to help them understand these people, they are nothing but whitewashed tombs. These people are hypocrites. Be aware and be on guard against their influence. And then notice what we see here. The disciples think he's talking about bread, physical bread. Jesus is talking about spiritual leaven. That leaven is the lamp of the community. And the disciples begin going, oh yeah. We forgot the bread. We forgot the bread. Only that we carry the bread. And Jesus begins to say again, verse 17, why are you discussing the fact that you have no bread? Do you not perceive or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Having eyes, do you not see? And having ears, do you not hear? And do you not remember? Immediately here in the passage, we find Jesus exposing the blindness of the disciples. I hope you begin to see why now we find our passage in a setting like this. These are men, the disciples, that is, these are men who had walked faithfully with Jesus for 3 years. Now, at this time in the book of Mark, we are approaching Jesus' last moments. And the disciples still don't get it. Well, the same is true, of course, of the Pharisees, who have been in the picture the entire time. Right? They're demanding signs from a man that has been performing signs. But every direction we look, we see spiritual blindness. And our passage finds itself here. Mark 7, you see the blindness. Mark 8, the verses after our passage. Now, is this a coincidence that our passage, verses 22 to 26, finds itself in this setting? This is not a coincidence. This is a God incident, if there's such a word. See what Mark is doing? Mark is saying that the disciples, the ones who are closest to Jesus, who have given everything for Jesus, left homes, left businesses, are oftentimes confused by him. They don't always know what's going on with him. And I think if you are also honest, even if you've been a Christian for many, many, many years, many times this is true of you. Or at least I know it's true of me. In every direction, Jesus looks and he sees blindness. And then he comes to the shore of Bethesda, and guess who comes to him? A blind man. A blind man. And this now gets us to our story. So that's the setting, but let's look at the story. We have looked at the setting or the context, now the story. So what's the story here? It is actually not that complicated. We are told they, in verse 22, they, stop there. Who is they? Jesus and his disciples. They are now in Bethesda. Stop there. What do you know about this place? This is actually the hometown of at least 3 of Jesus' disciples. So the homeboys are home. Perhaps news of their homecoming has gone before them. But what do we know is this. Some people must have heard that Jesus is in town. They must have heard that this is the real deal. He's the real deal. So they bring a blind man and they beg Jesus to touch him. We all need friends like this, right? Friends who know where to take us when we're thinking maybe in a way that is not the right, that is not aligned to what we have believed in the Word. They take this friend of theirs to Jesus. Do you have friends like those? Why again have they taken to Jesus? Obviously, they must have heard about Jesus. News has spread about Jesus. They've heard that Jesus Christ has touched people, and in this just simple touch, some people have been healed. As it did in chapter number 7, what is happening here is that Jesus Christ, he privatizes a miracle, which is actually important. Maybe not so much here in the US, but back where I come from, those people who do miracles, it seems like they only do miracles in front of cameras. But Jesus privatizes this miracle. Do you see that? Just as it did in Mark 7, 31 to 37. We're told in verse 23, and he took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the village. He's not trying to he's not trying to raise his social profile. He's not trying to get more likes on Facebook. Yes. He took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the village. And when he had spit on his eyes and laid his hands on him, he asked him, "Do you see anything?" See, Jesus Christ, it sounds a bit bizarre, right? He puts spit there, said, "Do you see anything?" And then he responds, the blind man, and says, "I see people, but they look like trees walking." What? I'm asking myself, how does this man know that people look like trees? And some critics will be like, "I thought you were blind." You see now why you can't trust this Bible? Well, there's a better explanation, I believe. First, it is possible that he has had others explain to him about people or about trees. Because even people that are blind, they can have some sort of imagination, right? Or he was born with sight but lost it at some time. I think the second option is more probable. But again, we are all speculating here, are we not? Look at verse 25. Then Jesus laid his hands on his eyes again, and he opened his eyes. His sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. You see that? How many miracles do you know that Jesus Christ had to perform twice? None. But again, this says much of the bizarre false miracles. I see this back in my home, whereby people claim they're healing people, but the people are never healed, but they're told that their healing is going to be gradual. We don't see that with Jesus. In fact, it's not like it took a long time between his first touch and his second touch. No, it doesn't take the same time. Touch him first and ask him a question. "Do you see anything?" He says, "I see men, but they're like trees walking." But now you see, he touches him again. And it's interesting here, the author uses all the words for seeing in these verses. It says he laid his hands on his eyes, and he opened his eyes. His sight restored. That's again about seeing. And then we're told he saw everything. How do you see everything? Clearly. Clearly also is a language of sight. And the fact that first he saw men, but they're like trees. He's seeing, but he's not seeing. Now the question is this man blind with the first touch? When Jesus Christ touched him, is this man seeing or is not seeing? It's a tough question, isn't it? Because he's seeing, but he's not seeing clearly. But we see after second touch, he's seeing clearly. His vision was now perfect. It's like 20/20 vision. You may be asking yourself, why are you belaboring this point? For one, I want you to know that every healing Jesus ever did brought a person back to absolute perfection. Not half healings I see at this back in my home. Not like the TV healers. Our God does all things well. But why the 2 steps healing? Why the 2 steps? Why was it 2 times? Well, the honest answer is this. I don't read anything that explains that. Do you? So I'm not going to try to speculate. I'm just seeing that's what Jesus Christ did. And again, this has nothing to do with his lack of power. We know Jesus Christ has all the power, divine power, nothing lacking. Same essence of God. But it's interesting, it says, verse 26, and he sent him to his home, saying, "Do not enter the village." It's like, after this was done, we're not going to post this on Instagram. We're keeping this private. Well, this is supposed to bring more people to the church here in Louisiana. No. So don't even enter the village. Go home. That's the same thing he did with the deaf mute back in chapter 7. He sent him home. Wow. But why was this the case? Go home. Don't tell anyone. Don't tell anyone. Believe Jesus Christ wanted to make it clear that his message by this time was not yet complete. Jesus Christ did not come so that people should see him just as a miracle worker. Someone was has come to give bread. The message was not complete by this time. In fact, even for the disciples, the message only became clear when? After resurrection. That's when the message was clear. That's when even his own disciples understood who Jesus Christ was. That's why you see in the book of Acts, when you see these disciples, they're a different bunch of men. They're confident, they're bold. You know what? Now they believe Jesus Christ is who he said he is. He had told them he was going to rise from the dead, and he did that. And because of that, that changed everything. They're beginning to see more clearly. So he's saying, don't publicize this. Don't enter the village. Go home. Don't say anything, because the message isn't going to be complete until the cross and the resurrection. So that's the story. We've looked at the setting. We've seen the story. Now let's look at the significance of the part 2 healing. When I read the Bible, I keep asking, yes, but why is this story here? Yes, but why? Whatever we make of that, my instinct is that we make almost nothing of that. The real reason, the real lesson is not what Jesus is doing with this blind man. It's easy for us to lose sight of what Jesus is doing and let's focus on this blind man, as great a miracle as it is. But the real lesson is what Jesus is trying to teach his disciples by illustrating what he was doing with this man. What's the lessons? The first lesson, the disciples, like the blind man, saw Jesus, but they didn't see him clearly. Think of your own understanding. I had mentioned the doctrine of election. I remember fighting this. I've had people in our church fighting this. It never makes sense to even me at first. And if you're honest, maybe some of you, it wasn't even clear to you. And I'm sure maybe some of you, some things are not even clear to you. Pastor Rice was even telling me something I'm not even sure about. He was telling me about federal vision. I don't know what that is. But have you noticed, the moment you understand the doctrine of election, you see it everywhere, even in Genesis, even in Exodus. God chose Joseph. That's the language of election. What about the doctrine of Trinity? God in three. God is 3 in 1. One God, 3 persons. Does that make sense to you? I'll tell you this. This is one truth I find difficult to try to understand, but there's some things I know I need to believe by faith. The disciples saw all Jesus was. But you know what? Just like the blind man, they saw him like trees walking. Their eyes and ears were still in need. And I think the significance of this is Jesus is telling his disciples this. You see, yes. You are not blind, yes. You are not what you used to be, yes. Remember the question I asked, was this man blind or was he seeing after the first touch? It's difficult because we can't say he's blind because we say he sees. But we can't say he's not blind because he doesn't see clearly. Their sight, the disciples' sight, was partial. They didn't fully grasp who Jesus is. Let me try to bring this closer maybe to home. Jesus gave this story as an illustration of the spiritual blindness of his disciples. You guys see, but you see like trees walking. Of course, this surface is a problem, does it not? Many times, if we're honest, even us, there's some element of ignorance in us, isn't there? The disciples having a hard time understanding everything about Jesus. You can imagine they walked with Jesus for 3 years with Jesus. God incarnate. They were with him, but still they didn't get it. If we're honest, that means you and I need to be honest with ourselves and understand ourselves. Could there be some areas that you are seeing but not seeing clearly? He's telling them to be careful of the dangers of the heresy of the leaven of the Pharisees or the Sadducees. All they can think about is lunch. He's asking, having eyes, do you not see? They're not saying, oh Lord, we are so silly. We forgot to bring bread, but you are with us. We need to be concerned about what we are going to eat. If you're thinking rightly, they can't be thinking about how is Jesus Christ going to feed all these people. In fact, if you're thinking rightly with all who Jesus is and all that is done, what they should have been thinking, man, we have a good problem because our only problem is to choose. Is it going to be McDonald's? Is it going to be KFC? Is it going to be tacos? Right? That should be their problem. But no, that's not the thinking. They were just wrapped up in themselves. Did they believe? Of course they believed. Had they exercised faith in Christ? I believe they did. Jesus called them and they followed him, did they not? Some of them immediately, they left their nets and followed Jesus Christ. Perhaps you have also been following Christ for some time. But have you noticed sometimes, at least where I come from, I pastor a quite youthful church. So what young people do, people that I believe love the Lord, they have crossed the line of faith, they'll come to me asking me for advice, but they've already made a decision. Pastor, on and on and on. See, many times our faith sometimes may struggle. We may not always trust our God like we ought to do. And you must remember this. Lack of faith, weak faith, makes our affections for God cold. Lack of faith, weak faith, makes our affections cold. It's like a marriage in which a relationship isn't being fed and nourished. I see men, but I see them like trees walking. I don't know all the details of this, but again, I heard this story. I don't know how true it is, so I stand to be corrected. But one of the giants of the faith, a man I highly respect for his ability to take some difficult concepts of theology and put it on the bottom shelf. R.C. Sproul. But I understand R.C. Sproul struggled for many, many years to quit smoking. I don't know if you guys know that. The best of men are men at best. Many times we think we see, but we don't know to see clearly. What's another significance? This is a demonstration of his deity. It is a demonstration of who Jesus Christ is. We know that in the next section, in verses 27 to 30, as I already mentioned, Peter is going to say, yes, you are the Messiah. But again, more light more light. But still, you see some blindness. And now to say, all of us, even in this room, we are all prone to forget the truths we know about Jesus Christ. In other words, we do need each other. So I just love this church. I'm seeing there's some old saints. I see there's young people, multi-generational church. This is just amazing. This is just awesome. And this is why when young people are in this church, they can be able to go to the older people so that the older people can help them to see more clearly. But sometimes even the older people, if they're honest, they can see more clearly through the younger people. But what I'm trying to say, my point is this is why the church needs each other. We need each other so that we can see clearly. And a place like this is where we speak the truth to each other. We speak the truth. We speak the truth in love, right? This is what the church is there for. You should be able to say, I'm able to see more clear now because of Grace Covenant Baptist Church. Because of this brother that I've been developing a relationship with this church, I'm able to see more clearly. Lack of spiritual sight can also be seen in the company we keep or the company we shun. Sometimes you avoid some people because you know these people will be able to expose me of my sin. I know these people may not be able to tolerate my sin. But I pray that you will be able to be a church that is helping each other to see more and more of Christ. Spiritual blindness is a pandemic. We do not see as we ought to see. And as we have seen from the disciples, even those closest to the light, they are not spared. Can you honestly say that you are seeing clearly? Are you seeing more in 2024? Well, it's just 2 weeks, right? But are you seeing more than you were seeing in 2022? Have you resolved that you want to see more clearly? In other words, there will be a commitment in your life to read the Bible more and more and more. Doing so devotionally, not just to tick the box. But as you're studying the Bible, you realize, I need to know more. But it's not that I just want to know more for myself, but also I can be doing my brothers and sisters much spiritual good. We have not been given the greatest suggestion. We've been given the greatest commission to go and make disciples. Part of making disciples so that we can be in each other's lives and helping each other see more clearly. I think if you're like my church, sometimes I look at some people in my church, I'm like, I wonder if this person really is living the life they should be living. And sometimes we just leave it at that. But God brings us together for a purpose, does he not? We need to help people to understand if they don't see the ultimate, they'll be the slave or the immediate. Jesus told his disciples, don't live for the bread that what? Perishes. When the eye is bigger than it should be. According to the South African optometric company, my problem is called nearsightedness. And this occurs when the eye is bigger than average. And you can see now, there's a play of words there now. I'm told my problem is because for the light to fall in front of the retina, instead of falling on the retina itself, it falls actually on the center, and that's why I'm not able to see as much as I see. So that causes spiritual nearsightedness. When the eye is bigger than it is meant to be, we'll struggle to see the Lord and his truth as we should be. In other words, we get in the way. We focus on the immediate, neglecting the ultimate. If I may ask, who do you think will be able to point at you as the reason why they are seeing better? The reason why they are seeing better is because of you. And if not anyone can point, sometimes people may point to you, not necessarily because you are saying, this is what I'm going to be going through with you. Sometimes even by our lives. But again, let me ask yourself, are you seeing more clearly? Do you see the eternal bread of life more clearly? Or are you simply consumed with the temporal life of bread? Don't miss the point, and hence the purpose. We need clarity about the identity of Jesus Christ. You know, it's as though Jesus is saying to Peter, Peter, you know what history tells us? This is history. You know, as if Peter was being told this, Peter, you will die in Rome and be crucified upside down. It's as though Jesus is saying to Andrew, you will go to Greece and you'll be martyred there. It's as though he's saying to Bartholomew, you go to Armenia and you become a martyr there. And to James, the son of thunder, you go to Syria and they'll club you to death there. To Matthew, according to some, you go to Ethiopia and you'll be stabbed to death. And Matthias, who took Judas's place, and Andrew along with him, together you go to Syria and you'll be burnt to death. And Philip, you die a cruel, cruel death in Carthage. And Simon the Zealot, you go to Persia, and because of your refusal to worship the sun god, you will be killed. And Thomas, doubting Thomas, you will go to India, and 4 soldiers with spears will call you. Now, who is going to Louisiana? What's the name of the city again? The state? Your state? Louisiana. Louisiana, yes. Who is saying Louisiana? I am in Louisiana for this purpose, so that I can help other people see more clearly. They may call you names. But the disciple is not greater than his master, is he? Because I do know you guys are very polite. No, I don't want to offend people. I don't want to offend people. Man, people have been offending God all this time. People need to be offended. But again, it's an act of love, like Jude says. Some people need to snatch them from the fire. I know this breaks friendships, families, but we need to do so, of course, in love. So, there's the story. Jesus, who I think is teaching his beloved disciples that they need to grow. They need to grow. And my friends, I think I need to grow as well. I hope that you also need to grow. I don't always see things clearly. But again, what do you need to see clearly? Do you know what you need to see clearly? I think this man puts it clearly, puts it well. He said this: Christian progress does not consist in seeing new things, but in seeing the old things more clearly. The same Christ, the same cross, only more distinctly and deeply apprehended and more closely incorporated into my very being. End quote. The gospel should be connected to our lives. In other words, we need to see the same truths. Give me the old story that Jesus Christ died for my sins, and that is enough for me. He died to pay the penalty for my sins. He has saved me from the penalty of sin. He's saving me right now from the practice of sins, and ultimately he will save me from the presence of sin. I need to remind myself of these truths clearly. I need to see more of these truths, and this is what will help you, will help me to see more clearly. Jesus is leading the disciples to his cross and then to their own. When this happens, then we'll see clearly. Brother, sister, so it is with you and of me. Therefore, we must always pray, Jesus, keep me near the cross. He will respond with his gracious touch like this man, and will begin seeing clearly. Let's pray together. Father, I thank you for this privilege of being with my brothers and sisters here. Lord, I pray that you may still use this feeble presentation of your truth, so that while I've long stopped speaking, by the power of your Holy Spirit, may you use this to help us all see clearly, to see more of Christ, to look back to the cross, and to be amazed, Lord, how could you save a sinners like us? Even like the song we sang, how could we be invited, Lord? How could we be invited? Us who were your enemies, now we sit on your table. Jesus, thank you. Continue to help us to see less of ourselves and to see more of you, so we can be used of you to help other people see more of Christ. Like beggars, help us